now it is time for discussions and question and answers. We have many questions in the chat box. Is it also visible for others, for other paper givers?
Yes, it can be seen.
Can you?
Yes, it can be seen.
So
I think it would be good to read it aloud so everybody can hear the question, Professor Enrico.
So may I ask the paper givers to look at the chat box and find the questions for you and prepare your answers. And meanwhile, may I ask Professor Uma Chakravarti? I see her name in the audience, one of the authors of the chapters in the books. May I ask Professor Chakravarti to speak something, if you don't mind? Yeah, we have a great chapter by her on patriarchy in India. Is it possible to demute her, Patty? Professor Uma Chakravarti. And I'm going to chair the discussion part with Professor Uberoy. Patricia, is Uma still in the audience?
Yes, we have asked her to unmute.
Great. And please send your questions to the chat box. Yeah, I'm asking the audience.
Maybe I can, Professor Emiko, maybe I can read some of the questions.
Yeah.
Okay. So there is this question from Song Namcho. I think this is either for you, Professor Emiko, or for, I think this is for you, Professor Emiko. So this is a question from Song Namcho. Acknowledging Asian intellectual heritage and Asian studies as global knowledge and new paradigm to explain Asian society better is wonderful and important efforts, but explaining modern Asian societies consisting with different generations of people whose culture and education are influenced by the West, it might be limited with Asian model to explain social interactions and culture of Asian society with coexistence of the young and the old with different experiences and histories of Western and Asian civilization. Is the Asian model, can the Asian model be an alternative of Western knowledge intellectual system to change our paradigm? That's the question.
Okay, so then may I answer to the question? While others are reading the questions, and Professor Chakrabarti is preparing for speaking. I'm not I'm not telling Asian way of thinking will replace a Western way of thinking. But what I want to promote is yeah, Asian, what to say? Asians to communicate with other Asians directly, and to learn what kind of toolbox they have. We have intellectual toolboxes, and we have various concepts in it. Some are from our own society, and some are from other civilizations, for example, Chinese or Indian, and we also have modern concepts in it. So we cannot take away our Western concepts from our intellectual toolbox, because they are already our parts in this indispensable part of our intellectual self. But I am proposing that we should learn from other Asians' way of connecting these various concepts in their own ways, and try to find a new way or more effective way to combine these concepts to understand ourselves and the world. I hope it's, well, I made sense for you. Okay, then other questions?
There's another question from Lamberto Pilatan. This is for Professor Nguyen. So the question is for Professor Nguyen, what are reasons for the marriage in Vietnam? Further, what are the factors that lead to the changes in marriage patterns in Vietnam and other Asian countries based on your study?
A question to Gwen Hu Min.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So for the first, I saw 3 questions for myself. So that is very good. Thank you for your interest in my presentation. So here the first question related to like the meaning of marriage. So that is in Vietnam, the marriage in Vietnam. So I can say that like in Vietnam now, even though like the people, that is there is a change from like the family value to individual happiness value when like getting married. However, family significant, family value is still very significant. That means, for example, like when we ask people about the reason why married, that is more than 50% said that is a very recent survey. That is a very large survey in Vietnam. That is more than 50% said that is because of love. That is we mean for like individual happiness value. And also about like 50% still consider that is they marry because as everybody marry, that is like just follow the tradition. And also a lot of people, that is they marry because they want to find a person who care for their family. So that is more like a family matter than like an individual matter. And like they also want to marry because they want to have like the emotion base for them during the difficult. And also 1/4 of people, they also want to marry because they want to have children. We consider this like traditional reason. So in general, I can see that like the value of marriage, it changes from family matter to individual, but still very slowly. And now the reason for family still counts for very large like a portion for the reason of marriage. So that is like the reason for marriage in Vietnam. For another thing, you mentioned about like what are the factors of changing the marriage pattern in Vietnam and also in Asia. So I can see say that like there are like a lot of reason of that. That is, for example, like from different framework. That is, she mentioned about like availability, desirability, feasibility. That means, for example, like the people they want to marry. That is desire of like the society. For example, like I just mentioned in Vietnam now, in general, the people still want to marry because like they want to follow the traditional one, or maybe like physiology. That is because if they want to marry, they have to prepare like in advance, like the house or other material base for them. Or like some other factor, if we base on like modernization theory, for example, like the education increase. When education increase, their thinking about the marriage and love also like a change, or like an urbanization at the same impact of education. People live in urban area, they also have a more open thinking about the marriage pattern. And also for like if they work in, I mean, for example, another thing from cultural approach, that is based on like traditional meaning of marriage, like I just mentioned in Vietnam. In general, the people in Vietnam, they can find out their significance of their life just through marriage. So that is very important that they need to follow, like everybody marry, I also should marry. So that is a cultural tradition. And also in empirical study, we also can talk about like some traditional indicator or variable. For example, like a birth order. Usually in Vietnam or in some East Asian country, that is the first person or the eldest child son, that is have a very important to the family. So they need to get married earlier, so that they just fulfill their responsibility to have the children to continue like the lineage of there. And also, for example, like in people in married by like arranged by their parents, they also should marry earlier, for example, like that. So that is a cultural approach. And also, especially
Professor Min,
yes.
Thank you very much for your detailed answer. Is it okay to stop?
You mean to make shorter?
Yeah.
Okay, I make shorter. So I just want to say something very briefly more. That is like when we talk about, especially for the case of Vietnam and China. In Vietnam, that is the impact of the wartime. And in China and in Vietnam, that is the impact of like the government policy. I think the presentation of Professor Hua Ang Phang also mentioned about that. And like some literature from my study also mentioned about that. Okay, so that is a very brief, and if you want to find out more, you can try email to me. Okay, thank you very much. And do I need to answer another question?
May I ask others to answer before your second answer?
There's another question for Professor Min from...
excuse me. May I ask Professor Uma Chakravarti to speak something? Are you ready to speak? No?
Uma has already been made co-host, so they
Oh,
can unmute anytime.
can you hear me, Professor Chakravalti? Okay, then later. So I think the paper givers had enough time to look at the chat box, and there are questions to Professor Nagasaka and Professor Ho in the chat box, and a few more questions to Professor Ming and myself. Can I ask Professor Nagasaka to answer the question for you?
Yes, thank you. Can I see?
May I read the question?
Yes, please. Yeah.
Okay. This is from Lamberto Pilatan. Good afternoon, Nagasaka Sensei. In the Philippines, the house husbands phenomena are very common. This happens if their wives go abroad or overseas for work and earn bigger amount of money for family's welfare. Sensei, is this house husband setup also present in Japan or in Hiroshima particularly, and why?
Oh, thank you very much for your very interesting question. In other societies, the same phenomena that we can observe or not is really important question we should address. And perhaps in the case of Japan, the number of such a phenomenon is, I think, the smaller. This is simply because international migration of the mothers is perhaps much less common in Japan than in the Philippines. So perhaps this kind of the setup of the household is not very common in Japan, or I'm not sure about the situation in the other countries, in the Thailand or the Indonesia or India. But as far as I'm concerned, in Japan, so the case of Japan, the number is smaller. What I want to add regarding this question is that when I did my fieldwork in the Philippines during the 1990s and 2000s, I was surprised by the fact that many men become, low income class households. That many men become house husbands when their wives went out from the for earning opportunity for income generating activities. And I was surprised by the skill of the household work of these men. And I grew up in Japan in the 1970s and the 1980s. This is bit surprise to me to observe that many house husbands in the rural Philippines during that time. So Alicia Pingol, the author of that article I introduced in my presentation, that she didn't elaborate on this point because that is perhaps the normal for her. So I think dialogue between the Asian scholars is important and has a possibility. If we consider the differences between our societies. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Nagasaka. And then may I ask Professor Ho to answer the questions you have? May I ask Patty to read the answer to Professor Ho?
Okay. The question for Professor Ho What are the reasons for the decline in marriage and the increase in the rate of divorce in China? This is a question for Professor Ho.
Professor Ho, could you answer? Professor Ho, can you hear me? Maybe not. In that case, let me answer the question from Professor Dan Ang from Vietnam. He's asking about the difference between Northern Vietnam and Southern Vietnam. And she says the influence from China is stronger in the Northern Vietnam, but not so strong in the Southern Vietnam. Yeah, that is quite true. We have two chapters from Vietnam. One by Professor Hu says the influence from China is so strong. So the tradition of Vietnam is Confucianism. But another one, Professor Do Tai Don's chapter is different. He focuses on Southern Vietnam, and he shows the customs in Southern Vietnam, which are quite different from Confucian one. So, as you say, Professor Southern Vietnam is closer to Southeast Asia, or if referring to my framework I showed at the beginning of the session, Southern Vietnam still have the characteristics of bilateral societies in Southeast Asia clearer even now. Did I? Okay. So so the difference between Northern and Southern Vietnam is a good example of the effects of civilizations. The civilizations covered bilateral areas, but their influences are different. Some are deep and some are not so deep, shallow. So Northern Vietnam and Southern Vietnam is a good example. And Korea and Japan is another good example. Korea developed patrilineal kinship system under the influence of Neo-Confucianism in Joseon Dynasty period. But Japan never developed patrilineal system, a genuine patrilineal system. We have something we can call pseudo patrilineal system, but actually that is quite genuine. This is my answer to Professor Ang.